everybody. Hope you all had a great lunch break. We are back with probably one of the neatest technology slash partners that I've come across in kind of my time in healthcare marketing. I've had the pleasure of getting to know the team over at Brevium over the past few years, going to similar conferences. We have shared clients. Greg is here to talk you guys through patient acquisition strategies and how they work with kind of reactivation methods. Greg, I'm going to give you the floor because I want everybody to get maximum time to hear your presentation and see what Brevium's all about. And I'll check back in with you guys later.
Fantastic. Thank you for the introduction, Lauren. Welcome, everyone. Greg Raeman, remotely working here from Lake St. Louis, Missouri. Thank you for joining. I've had a chance to listen to some phenomenal speakers yesterday and earlier today, talking about different market outreach methods for patient acquisition. And I thought I'd introduce a different method to you today called patient reactivation. A little bit about me. I am an employee of Brevium. I've been in the pharmaceutical market for about 30 years. About half that time I've spent doing practice consulting to help practices in the ophthalmology space operate more efficiently. I am also a business owner. I've owned a restaurant for 24 years. So believe it or not, some of these strategies that I've been listening to, I've learned a lot about, which will help me in that business as well. So I do have some practical business experience. A little bit about Brevium. We actually celebrated our 20th anniversary last week. Unfortunately, working remotely, I did not get a piece of birthday cake. I missed out on it. But we are a leader in data warehouse integration. We integrate with about 50 different practice management software systems. And our patented technology is used to identify patients that are overdue for care by diagnosis, by provider, and by location. These are fish that you have in your own pond, and just simply reconnecting with these patients is a great way to put more patients on your schedule. And it might be for a variety of different reasons. It might be because you hire a new provider. It might be because you have a provider retiring and you want to move those patients to a new provider. Maybe you've opened a new location and you want to do some geolocation strategies to bring patients to that new location. That's what our software supports. And if you have questions, we're going to save them for the Q&A at the end of this call. And more than happy to respond to them. If we run out of time, you'll have my email on the final slide, and please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that we don't handle here today. So we've talked a lot about, or at least you have, if you've attended any of these sessions, you've listened to a lot of different speakers, experts in their field, talk about new patient marketing. And that can be a real challenge. I know that from personal experience in working with ophthalmology practices and my own personal business, especially measuring return on investment, things like that. So the concept we're going to talk about today is existing patient reactivation. These are patients that have been in your practice. They've been diagnosed with some sort of problem, whether it be visual, whether it be dermatology, something like that. And they don't have a future recall in the system. They're overdue for care, and they don't have a future appointment. So basically, they're just sitting out there. And it's an opportunity for us to reach out to those patients and put them back on our schedule. Well, in terms of key metrics in determining your marketing program success, first, I want to just mention that I want to compliment Cardinal for the Scaling Up event. This is fantastic. It's the first time I participated, and it's much more engaging than I had thought it would be. I mean, this is just really awesome. If you're out there trying to really focus in on growing your practice, and you don't walk away from this without good ideas, you must have had your mute on, because it's been phenomenal content, and I really appreciate being invited to this event. As it relates to reaching out and acquiring new patients, there's a couple of things that we want to take into consideration. Lead generation is a big deal. We want to figure out, who is our target market, and are we creating interest with this target market? Are we causing them or creating action for them to take to come back to our practice, or in the case of a new patient, join our practice for the first time? One of the challenges and a key metric that we need to look at as well is lead conversion. While we put together a marketing budget to reach out to these patients, we want to make sure that not only are we creating brand awareness for these patients, but we are motivating them to take an action and be able to track that action. Because certainly I don't know what your practice uses as a marketing spend, but I have had conversations with several practices. Some of them are spend $500,000, some of them spend $1 million. Some of them don't spend near as much as they should probably spend. But in doing that, we want to make sure that we can track how effective those different outreach methods are. You know, it's really difficult if you have a billboard on the side of the highway to determine how many patients come into your practice as a result of seeing a billboard. You know, it might be social media. One of the things that I do when I'm looking for, you know, potential new customers is I review their Facebook page, for example. And, you know, the quality of the content on Facebook pages and what it might do to entice a patient to contact the office for a new service or a new provider that's seeing patients in their area is challenging. And oftentimes when I look at it, I'm seeing there's only, you know, 600 people following the page. So being able to measure how effective that is difficult. We also want to know how cost effective our outreach expense is. We also want to know the patient's yearly or lifetime value. You know, when they come back when they come in for the first visit, you know, what does that mean for us from a revenue standpoint? The most important thing is closing care gaps for patients, but there's a financial reality to it in running a business for a variety of different reasons. And we also want to be able to track that return on investment. Now, I do know that some different marketing efforts are easier to track than others. One thing I will say during our conversation today around patient reactivation, being able to track that return on investment is very easy, and it can be tracked to the penny, which we'll talk about here in a moment. I mentioned closing care gaps is the #1 reason why we want to contact these patients, but there are other reasons as well. You know, there's the financial reality of running a business for a number of different reasons. We're all experiencing inflation recently, which is putting a number of different pressures on our practices. We also have declining reimbursements. That doesn't help us at all. And then we also have mandated staff wage increases. I'm in Missouri, and the mandate took place last year, and it affected our business. We had to raise prices. So what I have here on this is just some key metrics around yearly revenue per patient. And Brevium, we work with a number of different specialties: allergy, dermatology. You can see them here: OBGYN, ophthalmology, otolaryngology, retina. A couple that aren't on here: urology, GI, cardiology. And we've got such a large patient database that we can go in and we can determine a number of different key metrics. And in this case, what we're looking at for allergy, for example, if we reconnect with a patient that's overdue for care, that patient typically comes back to the practice 7.7 times per year for the average revenue rate per encounter of about $270. So you can see on the far right column over here that the average revenue per patient is rather significant per year. I'm going to hone in on dermatology a little bit here because we're going to look at a dermatology case study. When we're talking about dermatology, a patient typically comes in 2.2 times per year. Their average revenue rate per encounter is about $228. That's about an annual revenue rate of about $505. Okay, so this is a pretty significant opportunity. You can see the revenue opportunity for OBGYN, ophthalmology, otolaryngology, and retina. And the great thing about being a data-driven company such as Brevium is for all of our customers, we have a chance to pool that data together and evaluate these different metrics, which is valuable for the practices as they look to move forward and strategize on how they want to build their business, you know, be more efficient operationally, how they might evaluate whether or not they need to add a provider or two, and what type of provider they might need to add. So all of these metrics are critical for a practice to evaluate their current state of business and how they want to proceed moving forward. Okay. We're back to dermatology. I mentioned we're going to focus on that just as an example. I realize there may be a variety of different specialties represented here, but if we look at the yearly average patient revenue for dermatology, it's about $505. And that just simply represents clinic revenue. If there is a surgical procedure in place, it might be a little bit higher. On all the research that I've done in the specialty of dermatology, the new patient acquisition cost is about $441. So if we're thinking about those different methods of marketing that we're learning about in this fantastic scaling up event, once we finally cast that broad net to increase our brand awareness and that patient is affected by our communication, they come into our practice, they make an appointment, and they see one of our providers and they're billed for that appointment. It represents about $441 to make that happen, based on my research. We're talking about patient reactivation. This is something that a lot of practices aren't aware of. Some acknowledge it could be the case. And what's interesting is for those that don't believe it's the case, Brevium does a good job challenging that belief, because we actually do an audit for practices to show them what their opportunity looks like. So in this particular case, we're looking at about every practice has usually about 25% of their patients are overdue for care or they're lost, meaning there's no communication with them any longer. There's not a recall in the system. They don't have a future appointment on the schedule. And there can be a number of different reasons for that. It could be the fact that they've ignored a recall that you had in your practice management software system for them. They maybe don't have an appointment scheduled after their last visit. And so reconnecting with those patients can be a challenge. They may have dropped out of ongoing treatments, such as immunotherapy for allergy. And then you also have new and established patients that cancel their appointment or they no-show. I always break it down to a per provider basis, based on my experience with Brevium and the audits that I have participated in with practices in different specialties. It's a pretty good benchmark to say that an individual provider typically has between 1,000 and 2,000 of these lost and overdue patients in the practice. No one's talking to them. They're just out there, and it's an opportunity to have a cost-effective way to acquire more of these patients back to the practice. Again, dermatology acquisition versus reactivation cost. We talked about the fact that in dermatology, the average patient visit is about $505. And the cost to acquire that patient, a new patient, is about $441. When we're talking about patient reactivation, it is much more cost effective. And I am not advocating that you don't brand your practice. I would advocate that you utilize excellent marketing people like the Cardinal people to do that. And they're giving you every opportunity from an educational perspective to do that as reasonably as you can. But patient reactivation is a little bit different. We already have those patients in our pool. I call them fish in our pond, and identifying who those patients are, putting together a sequence to reach out to them with an automated method is key. The automation piece is important because it takes the burden off of your staff, and in some cases can reduce the need for staff in some practices by having an automated method. But in this particular case, on average, to reconnect with a patient or reactivate a patient that is absent from your practice, they've been seen by a provider, they don't have a future appointment, they're overdue for care, typically costs about $17 per patient to do that. And that's a patient that Brevium has identified, we have reached out to, we have connected with, the patient has made an appointment, kept the appointment, and had been billed for the appointment. And that's $17. So it's a very efficient way to reach out to these patients and stay engaged with them. Especially if you're in a specialty where, take dermatology patients, for example, if you have someone that's at moderate risk, they've maybe been diagnosed with some sort of skin cancer in the past, and they're out there, and we need to close that care gap with that patient. It's vitally important we do that. If we don't do that, there's some liability involved, and there's also some health risk for the patient if they're high risk for whatever reason. So I just want to say here that this is a very, very cost-effective way to acquire patients in your practice. And as you well know, our typical look back is about 5 years. So a patient that hasn't been seen in 1 to 5 years. And so after the third year, you're bringing that patient back as a new patient. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this dermatology case study. This happens to be a practice in Atlanta that I started working with last year. I reached out to them in June of 2023, and they replied to me. This is a private practice, and I should have mentioned this before. I've mentioned the specialties that Brevium works with. We also work with private practice, a lot of private practice, and we also work with a lot of private equity-sponsored health investments. And so we have a lot of experience there. This particular private practice has 19 providers. This practice is growing. They're adding new doctors, they're adding new locations, and they were looking for a way to ramp up their patient acquisition strategy. And so we connected in June of 2023, and we did what's called the Brevium connection for this practice. It's basically a practice audit. This is something uniquely special about Brevium, I think. A lot of times when you're asked to engage with a third-party vendor, you often don't know how well that's going to work for you until you sign a contract. So we do what's called the Brevium connection. And it is a free integration with your practice management software system. And what we're doing there is we're looking to see how many patients are overdue for care that do not have a future appointment and don't have a recall in the system. And we're doing that by diagnosis, by location, and by provider. So we did that for this practice, and we identified a pretty significant opportunity. They had 19 providers, and they had just shy of 30,000 overdue patients. They started using the software in August 2023 in 3 locations and continued to expand that throughout the course of the year. Fast forward to May 2024, and this practice has reactivated 2,454 patients that were overdue for care, did not have a future appointment, and did not have a recall in the system any longer. As a result of that, and being a data-driven company that we are, we also track to see how many, in this case for dermatology, it's kind of like ophthalmology doing cataract surgery. Most procedures is their most common surgery. And we went back and we looked to see how many of those patients had had surgery that we had reactivated, and 97 of those patients had gone on to have surgery. In terms of revenue generated, what we're looking at in the first, let's see, from June to May, in the first year, the incremental revenue generated was about $560,000. Now, I want to point out here, this is important, that's only for the first return visit to the clinic. And the reason why I say that's important is because that $17 fee that we talked about, that only applies to the patient's first return visit. Once we reactivate a patient, it costs $17 to do it. If they come back for their second appointment in that first year, it doesn't cost you anything. It's only for the first return visit. Okay, so that's important to point out, because if you remember, for that dermatology patient a few slides back, they return approximately 2.2 times per year. So we can extrapolate that. We're only looking at first return visit revenue here, but if we extrapolate that throughout the practice, the impact is rather significant. So if that patient comes back 2.2 times in the first year after reactivation, and we're looking at that clinic revenue, as well as the revenue from Mohs procedures, which can run anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500 per procedure, we're looking at the incremental clinic revenue opportunity for this practice in the first year of about $1.24 million. And again, that is the 2 return visits, that is the surgical revenue, and the reactivation cost to reconnect and put all these reactivated patients back on the schedule over the course of the year is about $42,000. And that's $17 per reactivation. So for this practice, the return on investment was about 30x return on investment. About every dollar they spent with Brevium, they generated $30 in return. So I think that's a pretty good return on investment. I mean, if I knew where to get that return on investment in the stock market, I probably would not be sitting here today. So, so again, you can kind of look at the bottom of the screen here and see how that revenue flows through the practice. So for this dermatology practice in Atlanta, this is a really great opportunity. As I mentioned, they were bringing on new doctors. They needed to fill those doctors' schedules quickly. What's interesting is one of the anxieties that new providers have oftentimes when joining a practice is, how long will it take me to build my practice? How long will it take me to fill my schedule? And I'll tell you an interesting story. I was actually doing a Brevium product demo with an ophthalmology practice, and they came to us because they were interviewing a new cataract surgeon, and the cataract surgeon was coming from a practice that uses Brevium. And one of the questions the cataract surgeon had for the practice was, do you use Brevium? They didn't know what we were. They didn't know what we do. And he explained to them, he said, look, he goes, I want to join a practice that uses Brevium because I'm a cataract surgeon. And as soon as I join, I want to be able to fill my cataract surgery schedule as quick as I can. And that was the experience that he had at this prior practice. They were using Brevium to mine their database, to identify patients that were overdue for care by diagnosis. And in this case, that diagnosis he was concerned about was a patient who had been seen, diagnosed with a mild or moderate cataract, that had gone back home, didn't have a future appointment. It's now 2 years down the road. They haven't heard from the patient. They don't have a way to connect with the patient. So after identifying, we targeted those patients right away to bring them back. This practice he was interviewing with is now a Brevium customer. And part of the reason why that happened is because he wanted to be able to fill his surgical schedule as quick as possible. So just a little anecdotal story there. It helped me get some new business, and it made that surgeon much more comfortable joining the practice because he knew that he'd be able to fill his schedule with cataract surgery sooner rather than later. We keep talking about a couple different things here, reminders, appointment reminders, recalls, and reactivations. And I just want to go through and define again in detail what each of these are. Appointment reminders, all practices do that. When I go to my dermatologist, I get a reminder that I have an upcoming appointment. It usually comes through ModMed or something like that. Most practices have an automated recall process, meaning if I'm a patient in my dermatology practice and they want to see me once a year for skin cancer screening, they'll either have this function in their practice management software system, or they'll hire a third-party vendor to send out that recall notice, letting them know that appointment is coming up, or that they need to schedule an appointment because they're due for their annual checkup. Although some practices don't have an automated system for this, it's very manual process, and it's done by staff who aren't always happy to do it, and oftentimes it just kind of falls through the cracks. And then you have patient reactivation. Brevium does all three of these functions, but what separates us from other companies is we're the only company out there that does patient reactivation. And that is identifying those patients that are overdue for care by provider, by location, and by diagnosis, putting together a sequence to reach out to those patients and putting them back on the schedule. And the fee only applies to a patient that is contacted, that makes an appointment, keeps an appointment, and gets billed for the appointment. If they cancel the appointment or no show, it doesn't apply. So we're very, very accountable in terms of what we're doing for our customers. Every day, because we have access to the ledger in the practice management software system, we can track revenue. So you'll see every single day just how much revenue is generated by the patients we reach out to. So what is the process? Well, the process is with a simple business associates agreement. For the Brevium connection, for example, we mine the practice management system using CPT codes, ICD-10 codes, J codes, other codes, billing history, that type of thing, to identify these overdue patients. And then we target them based on the provider, their diagnosis or disease state and location. And then we communicate them with a number of different methods: text message, emails, auto calls, mailers, live calls, and then we track the performance, the financial performance of those activities. One of the things that we've learned about patient reactivation is making 4 to 5 contact attempts is very, very important. That gets you the highest conversion rate, as opposed to just making one attempt and then just forgetting about that patient. What's also interesting is when we do the Brevium connection, we identify in your practice management software the methods that have the right information input to the software to be able to contact these patients. This is sometimes be revealing for an administrator or a COO to see that we're not really doing a good job putting in email addresses, for example. We only have 34% of those patients that have a good email address entered. Only 56% of them have a textable phone number. They might have one, we just may not be entering it correctly. So we identify how these patients can be reached. And then the other part of this is varying the different methods is the most effective way to put these patients back on your schedule. So if you look at this graph on the right, in the first, second, third attempt, if we use one method, it is the point of diminishing returns. If we vary the methods, a text message, an auto call, an email, we get a much higher response rate from those patients. So 4 to 5 communications in a sequence with varying methods is the most effective way to convert these overdue patients and put them back on the schedule. This is an example of an audit that we did for an ENT practice. If you look at this, they have 52,000 overdue patients. If you look at the left-hand column here, you see the different reasons. This is where we're searching for these different reasons using diagnosis codes, so on and so forth. And we can see the interval of care for, let's say, chronic sinusitis is 6 months. In this case, they've got over 7,000 patients that are overdue for care. They've been out there, they haven't been seen in 10 months, they don't have a future appointment on the schedule, and they don't have a recall. So I would like to invite any of you on this call that would like to see what your opportunity is for your practice to contact me after this. You'll have my email address, and we can set up the Brevium connection to identify your opportunity and see what the potential is to reconnect with these patients. It's very, very cost effective. In addition to that, you get enterprise level reporting. We do a scheduling analysis looking for and identifying capacity in your individual providers' schedules and comparing them to benchmarks. We also have different recapture strategies, and we also do a return on investment analysis to see what that opportunity looks like. So I'm just going to throw my last slide up here. I know we didn't leave a whole lot of time for Q&A, but I'm providing my contact information here in my email. If you are interested in doing the Brevium connection to see what your opportunity looks like to acquire these patients, please just send me an email or make a phone call, and we can make that happen for you. We don't charge for it. 95% of the practice management systems we integrate with don't charge for it, so it's a free audit, and it's a great business opportunity. And I'll open it up for, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we've got a couple minutes, for Q&A. Let me see here. Okay, see, we've got a few people. We've got a Q&A here. Hello, Greg, session was great in your experience. Is there any minimum size of overdue patient database to implement this solution? No, of course, the larger the practice, the more patients are going to be overdue for contact. You know, take a private equity sponsored dermatology group with 116 providers, has well over 100,000 patients ready for contact. So the size of the practice doesn't necessarily matter. I think I'm at, let's see, I've got a couple minutes here left. Let me pop in the chat and see if I see anything here. Okay, well, thank you for all the polite comments that you've made. And I will review this once our time gets allotted here. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions, again, or if you would like to see the opportunity in practice, and I'm more than happy to help you do that.